Good evening all, and welcome. Being stuck at home for months on end, the prospect of someone trying to break in becomes ever more terrifying. So I hope you're ready, because it's time to get uncomfortable and let the darkness take control. This happened 2 summers ago, while I was house sitting out in California for an older couple I had met at a conference for work. It had seemed like a dream scenario. The couple wanted to vacation in Hawaii for 2 weeks, but didn't want to board their cats, and I had been chatting with them about wanting to visit California again, where they happened to live. Because I had loved it the first time I went, and we figured that we could mutually benefit if I came out and house sat for them. That's what we agreed to. I flew out there and they showed me around for a few days, taught me how to care for the cats, 2 of them. One was extremely shy and I barely saw, which is important later, and their plants, as well as give me access to their house and cars. These people were very generous, and before I knew it, I had dropped them off at the airport and I was on my own. At first, it really was the dream vacation. I was staying in Oakland and making forays into San Fran, Sonoma, and Monterey. In the mornings, I would walk out the front door and shortly be hiking the paths surrounding nearby Mount Diablo, and I was just ultra content with the world. I was so enamored by the area that I had actually started looking into taking some steps to relocate out there. But then one day, about halfway through my final week, when I got back to the house, I felt really odd, almost like I shouldn't go inside. I shook it off and went inside anyway, because it was getting late and I needed to put out dinner for the cats. Once I was inside, I forced myself to ignore how off it felt, and I made some food for myself and went to bed. I was shocked to find this shy cat hiding under my bed and crying. This was the first time I had ever seen her up close. The entire time I had been there, up to that point, she never left the host's bedroom unless she didn't realize I was around. Again, I ignored feeling weird, and just assumed she had decided I was okay and went to bed. I did start locking my bedroom door that night though. I also remember that about halfway through that night, I thought I heard someone walking around in the gravel outside my road, but after listening for a bit, I didn't hear anything else and went back to sleep. The day after in the morning, I still felt a little odd, but kept up with my plans for the day. I drove out to a little music festival in Sonoma and went clothes shopping and had a great overall day. When I get back to the house though, I found the front door locked in a way I hadn't left it. Basically, my host never locks the deadbolt, only the lower second lock. And that's the only lock my key worked on. So I never messed with the deadbolt, but it was definitely locked. So I had to call my host and find the hideaway key, which to their credit, safety-wise, was buried like a whole foot underneath a bush outside and had definitely not been unearthed for a long time. So I used that. I went inside and kept the key with me just in case it happened again. And it did, but for a different door. This time I had stepped out into the garage to get a drink, and when I turned around to go back into the house, the door was shut and locked. I could use my normal key on that door, but I was still pretty bewildered. My own cat's a whack, so I think in my mind I was trying to come up with a way the cats could be locking me out the house, but I was coming up empty. I decided I must have been misunderstanding how the locks worked, and just wrote it off and started checking and triple checking the locks when I went out the house or into the garage. That night, when I went to bed, there was a really awful feeling of unease that was still there, and so was the shy cat, who was clearly unhappy to see me but also wouldn't leave my room. But again, I just locked my bedroom door and went to sleep. The next morning I felt awful, nausea, body ache, and I had no desire to leave the house, so I decided to stay in and Netflix for the day. This vacation stay was like a full 2 weeks, so I didn't feel like I was in any hurry to get all my touristy things in. Anyway, as the day went on, I started to feel that feeling of wrongness again, and it morphed into the feeling of being watched. Around mid-afternoon, it got to the point that I was so uneasy that, even feeling awful, I decided to get out of the house for a bit to shake it off. I was getting a bit low on food, so I went to the grocery store and brought a few items that I didn't think would hurt my stomach, and I started to leave the checkout, and the cashier said the generic, "Have a great evening," and I just instantly started crying, shocking myself and the poor cashier, because I just had this intrusive thought that said, "You might be the last person to ever say that to me." When I got to my car, I was still crying, and my entire body was telling me not to drive back to the house. I couldn't not though, because I didn't want to neglect the cats. So I drove back, parked in the driveway, and convinced myself after about half an hour to just open the front door. Once I did that, I thought I would get over it and be able to go in and at least feed the cats, and then maybe I'd get a hotel room after. But my body physically would not let me inside. It was like I was stuck in the entryway, and I then made a deal with myself. I would yell into the house, saying I had already called the police and that they were on their way. In panic logic, I figured that that would make anyone in the house leave, so I faced the inside of the house, looking down the hallway towards the bedrooms, and I did just that. The second I had finished saying, "They're almost here, so if you want to avoid being arrested, you better leave now," the light in my host's room turned on and I heard some banging. Immediately I hightailed it back to the car, called the police for real, and proceeded to have a mental breakdown while talking to the dispatcher. Once they arrived, they checked the house and didn't find anyone. The double doors in my host's bedroom were left wide open. I'm so glad the cats didn't get out. And there was a pile of food wrappers in the corner behind the blinds, so they said it looked like someone had been there. What makes it so scary to me is that nothing was taken, and that based on the shape of the house, that would have been the perfect vantage point to see me in the living room as I stayed home sick. To explain this, the house was in an L shape, and from the windows into the garden that were in my host's bedroom, you could see into the living room windows. Also, the minute the police were gone, they said they couldn't prove anyone was there. There were no signs of forced entry, and we couldn't get a hold of my hosts immediately to verify if anything had been taken, which once they were back, they verified that nothing had been. So they said they'd do a patrol, but nothing else. The shy cat was right back in my host's bedroom, and I didn't see her again until I left to go back home. So basically, I think the intruder had been there at least 2 days, forcing her to choose between two strangers and leading her to choose the one that was at least a little less strange. It messed me up pretty bad, especially because they didn't catch the person and didn't seem to have any desire to look, and I still had to stay in that house for the next 3 days. Nothing else odd happened, and I didn't feel anything off the rest of the time I was there, but the damage was done. I've never felt completely safe in a home without doing a complete search before bed since. But I am extremely glad my gut spoke up. I guess I'd rather have some residual anxiety than not be here at all. So whoever was in my host's house watching me, please, let's never meet. This happened a few years ago when I was 13 and my brother was 11. My parents had to go out and thought it would be better to leave me and my brother home alone. So that's what they did, and they left, taking my sister aged 6 with them. Me and my brother were all the way down in our basement, which is where we had our video game set up, and the two of us were just downstairs playing Mario Kart on the Wii. We had the home phone in between us just in case one of our parents called, and an hour goes by and the phone starts to ring. We look down and the caller ID says it's our uncle. We decide to just let it ring, and how our phone worked, it would ring about 5 times and then stop. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3, and the phone stops ringing. My brother doesn't pay attention to it, but I do realize for it to stop that early is if someone were to pick it up, and we were home alone. I get really suspicious and my paranoia gets the better of me, and I take my brother and we go upstairs and see the phone is still there. But there is still a phone on the 3rd floor, and my parents' room, so we go towards the stairs, and what we see chilled us to the bone. A man in his late 40s to early 50s is all I can really tell you, because the second we saw him, me and my brother screamed, ran out the front and went straight to our neighbor's house. We tell them what happened and they proceeded to call the police, then our parents. They came fast. I don't know what was wrong with the man, but he never left the house. He just stood there, and from what I heard, after he was arrested he was placed in a mental hospital. The story may not be totally crazy compared to many others, but I just think what could have happened to me and my brother if my uncle didn't decide to call. Our little village was the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and I could count the amount of houses on 2 hands. We were a really quiet and close-knit community, and nothing ever happened there. Proper out in the sticks stuff. One night a few years ago, my mom and my stepdad had gone out to this concert and left me in charge of my little brother and the dog. I wasn't very old, about 14, and I felt really proud that my parents trusted me enough to do that. I thought I was a pretty cool big brother, and I thought we'd be doing cool babysitter stuff like staying up late and eating pizza. I'm kind of glad we did, because I don't know what would have happened if we hadn't. At about 10:30 the power cut out. I didn't think anything of it because the weather hadn't been great lately, and I figured that had something to do with it. I got some candles out the cupboard and lit them, and put some of our favorite songs on. As soon as I sat down, Sonny, my little brother, turned to me, and being the weird little kid he was, told me very calmly that someone was outside. I was a little perturbed by him, but the dog hadn't done anything, so I presumed it was just the neighbors or something. He just shrugged and went back to his drawings. There's a running joke in our house that you don't need a clock with the dog around, because he's such a creature of habit that he will constantly get up at the exact same time every night to tell you it's time to initiate his nightly go-to-bed protocol. It was about 3/4 of an hour after the power went out when my dog decided that now was the time. I told Sonny to go get the dog his biscuit while I let him out for a wee. Now, our kitchen is an extension to the original house, and so, as such, has a flat roof that's comparatively low to the ground compared to the rest of the houses, and offers easy access to the bathroom window. As I open the door so the dog could do his thing, Sonny pushes past me in the doorway and whispers, "I know you're out here, and I'm calling the police." As he turned around with the biggest, proudest smile you've ever seen on his face, there was a very distinct rustling coming from just above the doorway. I don't think I'll ever forget the way Sonny's face dropped when he looked just above my head. I looked up. The man was sitting on the roof above me, panicked, tried to kick me, and then ran off into next door's garden, and presumably into the cornfield surrounding our village. I was beyond terrified, and Sonny was crying his eyes out. I ushered him inside as quickly as I could, and retrieved a pointy metal object from the kitchen. We both went back to his room, and I told him to try to get some sleep while I waited for our parents to come back. It was an agonizingly long 4 hours before they did. My stepdad immediately went outside to check to see if everything was alright. I heard them talking about how something had smashed the fuse box. Obviously, we called the police, but they didn't come until later that day. They did a search of the immediate premises and found a makeshift bed in a nearby disused barn, along with pictures of silhouettes of us in the shower through the frosted glass. I think it's pretty safe to say the whole experience definitely shook us up. We moved out there as soon as we could, but I still shut curtains whenever I can, and I see shadows underneath every door I see. Sonny keeps quiet about it, but I'm not sure if that's just because his brain has cut it out or what. My old house was pretty pumped up on security. We had finger IDs, passcodes on doors, and cameras everywhere. An automatic security system that could call the police or play fake, the cops have been called, blah blah blah. This story happened a few years back. My dad noticed a weird-looking man, pretty covered up, lurking on the streets just outside our house. We thought nothing of it, since sometimes you get the occasional drunk or high person wandering around. But this man started to inch closer and closer to our house, first being on the opposite side of our street, then before we knew it being basically on our property. We just sort of watched him to see what he would do. I'm pretty sure we got bored and walked away and just forgot. Then we started to hear strange noises coming from downstairs, where our front door was. We decided to switch on the camera, and sure enough, this guy is banging on our door trying to get in. Then he looks through the window. He gives up and then starts to go around the side. There was a set of stairs that led to the upper area where we were, and he starts to head up, which sent my dad to go to the side of the house, where he was with a weapon, and scream at him. This guy runs and we don't see him again. That was the end though, right? Wrong. He comes back again. I guess he saw that the car was gone from the driveway, as my dad had to go get something, leaving me and my mum, and he looks around. We didn't want to confront this guy, so we had an idea of playing the fake cop alert that could be heard outside. So we played it, and as soon as the guy heard it, he ran. Never saw him again after that. What makes this story creepier is on the news later it showed a guy who lurked around houses and then elected to end their lives. He'd been arrested, and it was the same man who was at our house. My name is Starla. I was born and raised in Toledo, Ohio. I'm married and have one child from a previous relationship. My husband is on dialysis due to kidney failure. He does it at home now, but the story I'd like to share with you took place at a time when he was actually getting his dialysis treatment at a center. One day I was home alone, just writing music and listening to free instrumental vibes via YouTube. My son was with his father at the time, and I thought I heard a knock on my door. So I turned down the music and listened for about 3 to 5 minutes, and I heard nothing. I thought perhaps my ears were playing tricks on me, since I'm known to be a very paranoid person. I then turned the music back up and heard a knock on the door again. This time my mind wasn't playing tricks on me, so I slowly crept down to the door and looked through the peephole, and then I saw him. Someone squatting. I'm assuming waiting for me to open the door. I then backed away and heard a voice say, "I know you're in there. Let me in, or I'll break in." I yelled and told them to leave me alone. I didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but I would be calling the police, and what he said next made my skin crawl. "The police won't be able to save you, because I'm good at keeping up with time and hiding the deceased." In other words, the police wouldn't arrive on time. Then he said, "If this door isn't open by the time I count to 5, I'm breaking in." After he counted, he started to kick in my door. I ran to my bedroom and locked it and phoned the police. As I was locked in my bedroom, I heard him rambling through things and saying how he was going to find me, so come out, wherever I was hiding. He then came to my bedroom door, started turning the doorknob, and I was sweating grease in a skillet while he was trying to open it. But that didn't last too long, because about 10 minutes after, they caught him and arrested him right then and there and made me go downtown to file a report. When I went to court to testify and rest my case, the judge told me I was lucky that I got away, and I asked, why? Apparently the man that broke into my house was actually wanted for breaking into another person's home that he had been stalking for quite some time, and ended her life, an elderly lady. I feel bad for whoever the lady was, but don't get me wrong, I'm happy and relieved that I was one of the ones who made it out alive. I told my husband all about it, and he was more angry than anything. We soon moved out of that place where this event happened, and have never had to experience anything like that again. This happened about 15 years ago, but to this day I cannot live in a ground floor building. When I was 15, I was staying at my mum's house for the weekend. My parents are divorced, so it was just me and her. It was about 12:30 a.m. I was chilling in the living room watching TV while my mum was asleep. The living room had 2 windows that faced the front yard, and I often left the curtains open as the house was set back from the road. My mum's house was not in the best part of town, but I had always felt relatively safe there. While I was watching TV in my pajamas, I saw movement from the corner of my eye from the window that was closest to me. It was only about 4 feet away. I turned and looked out the window, and a man's face was staring right back at me, smiling the most hideous grin I'd ever seen. I was frozen, and for about 20 seconds I was just sitting there with my eyes locked on his. Suddenly my panic set in, and I leapt up from the sofa and tried to run to my room. I slammed my leg right above my knee into the wooden coffee table and fell to the ground, my leg feeling like it was jelly. I scrambled up and shouted for my mum. My mum came running in half asleep, wondering what was wrong. I started stammering that someone was in the window watching me, and just as my mum was starting to realize what I was saying, we both heard someone attempt to open the front door to the house. Me and my mum both stood still, thinking that it was double locked. But then, when it stopped, my mother looked horribly grave and just whispered, "The back door." She turned and bolted through the house, and scrambling turned the deadbolt on the back door in the kitchen and backed away. She then ran to her room and pulled a baseball bat from beneath her bed. That I knew she kept there because she was a woman living alone. Frantically, she asked me to call the police, which I did, whispering to the operator that someone was trying to get into the house. We then saw a shadow approach the back door quickly and desperately try to open the door, kicking and grunting while they tried to get in. My mum shouted, "I have a bat and will end you if you try to get into this house. The police are on their way." The person on the other side stopped and was still for about 30 seconds before turning and running away. My mum and I stood in the middle of the kitchen for 20 minutes. That's how long it took the police to get there. The whole time my mother had the bat raised and was ready to strike. When the police finally came, they looked around the house. They found that the flowers outside the window were trampled, and there were several cigarette butts on the ground outside the window where I saw the man. No one in my house smokes, and the police assumed it must have been there for a while. They didn't find him and took my description, but we never heard anything more about it. My mum moved away from that house a year later, even though we never had another incident. I now live in another country with my husband, who wonders why I have no idea to own a house and love living in high-rise apartments. I also pay for state-of-the-art home security and have a baseball bat in my closet just like Mum. I have no idea what would have happened if my mother had not realized the back door was unlocked and had beaten the man to it, or if for some reason my mother wasn't there that night as she worked late. I don't know if the man thought he could overpower 2 women alone, or if he was just trying to scare us. Whatever that man had intended, I pray he didn't find someone else who forgot to lock their back door. I was watching my daughter's kids while she and her husband were out of town. They have a teenage daughter called Alyssa. It was 3 a.m. and I woke up by a weird rustling sound. I looked out the window and see movement. I saw a boy emerge from the bushes on the other side of the house. I saw a bike tossed on the lawn that definitely wasn't ours. My first thought was that it was a burglar casing houses, but since he looked young and came on a bike, I figured scaring him straight would be enough for him to decide to head home. I didn't want to ruin a teenager's life by calling the cops straight away. So I went out to the porch, flipped on the light and said, "Can I help you?" in my classroom voice. The guy looked surprised but not nervous. He was wearing a Letterman-style jacket, but once I got a clear view of him in the streetlights, he seemed much older than my granddaughter, gruff and more wiry and athletic. He walked up closer to the house and said, "Yeah, I'm looking for Alyssa." I gave him a disapproving glare, hoping he'd realize that he came looking for a girl late at night, and a grumpy old person answered, "It's time to split." I'm thinking what must have happened is Alyssa knew her parents were going out of town, and maybe before she knew I'd be staying over, told a secret older boyfriend to come. It was late at night and I was alone with several kids, so I didn't want him coming any closer to the house. I also thought it was weird he came so late, and wanted to be sure Alyssa actually wanted to talk to him. So I said, "I'm sorry, who?" And he said, "Alyssa, you know, Alyssa Elderman, this is her house." I thought he knew her full name. They must at least be friends. I said, "You wait there." He began to walk up and I felt a sick burning in my gut. Instinct kicked in and I yelled, "No, stop, freeze." Then readjusted and said, "You stay right there. This is private property and don't take a step closer. Wait there." So I go in and Alyssa is asleep just one room over from where the rustling first occurred. And I wake her up and say something to the effect of, "I don't know what the big idea is to have friends over at this time of night, but can you tell them to go home?" She had no clue what I was talking about. I say, "There's a guy outside waiting for you." Confused, she gets up and goes to the window. She sees him and goes white as a sheet. "He asked for me?" "Yeah." "By name?" "Yeah." "Call the police. I've never seen him before in my life." I called 911 immediately, but as I was on the phone with them, Melissa started tugging at my arm. "He's coming up." I had younger kids in the house to think about, so I kept the door latched and pulled it just open enough for the latch and yelled, "I'm asking my husband, and none of us know of any Alyssa. Leave my property or I'm calling 911. He got angry and started yelling for her to come out. Thankfully, the police came pretty quickly, and when he heard the sirens, he grabbed the bike and ran off. I watched where he was running to, and he jumped into the passenger side of a car without headlights or front plates and sped off. The police followed in the same direction once I pointed them, but they didn't get him. They advised us to take all her social media details offline if she wasn't sure she didn't know this person, and said they had a couple of similar reports recently and were looking into it. I got a heavy-duty lock, and she slept in my room for the remainder of my visit. A few years ago, I was renting a house in Northern California. The neighborhood was just outside the suburbs. It seemed like the perfect balance of having space and having nice neighbors close enough to not feel isolated. The area had no streetlights, so it was very dark at night, especially if there were clouds blocking the moonlight. It didn't bother me though. It made my little house feel even more quaint on dark nights. I got off home from work one day in midwinter. It was a cloudy night, So pulling up to my house, I saw only what my headlights and front porch illuminated. When I got out of my car, I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke. It was odd, as I'd never smelt that before around the house. I didn't see anyone nearby, so I ignored it and went inside. I had just gotten off a shift with a few hours of overtime, so I was pretty tired. Even though it wasn't even 7 yet, I decided to take a shower and call it a night. I woke up sometime later, sure that I had heard a noise inside my house. I wasn't worried right away because my friend would sometimes stop by to use my shower after work on his way home from night classes. I even gave him a spare key so he could stop by even if I wasn't home. He would always text me to let me know beforehand though, and I hadn't heard my phone go off. I reached over to my bedside table and picked up my cell phone to see if my friend had sent me a text. The bright light from my phone's screen and number pad blinded me. These were the days before cell phones had light sensors that would dim the screen to the dark, and this particular phone was so bright I could use it as a flashlight. Through squinted eyes, I could make out that it was 9-something, but I couldn't tell if I had an unread text or not. I set my phone aside and called out my friend's name. There were a few seconds of silence before I heard loud footfalls as someone started running through the bottom floor of my house. I leapt out of bed and ran to the closet. They were already up the stairs by the time I'd opened the door and stepped inside. That house had 3 rooms upstairs, 2 bedrooms on either side of the hallway, the one I was in and a spare, and a bathroom at the end. The bedroom doors were both closed, but the bathroom door was cracked open, and I heard whoever was in my house thunder down the hallway past my door and into the bathroom. Thank God he did. That gave me enough time to open the little attic access in the ceiling of my closet and hoist myself up. I had just started to lift myself up when the person ran back out the bathroom. My feet were just barely inside the attic when my bedroom door burst open. I heard footsteps run into my room and stop. When they didn't see me in the room, they ran back to the hallway and into the other room, which just had boxes stacked in a corner, some weights and a table where I painted my miniature models. I guess they decided that if someone was hiding it would be in the bedroom, because they charged back into my room and turned on the light. A moment later, the closet door was ripped open. I was crouched in my attic just a foot or so away from the access, so I could try and stop them if they began to climb up. From my vantage point, all I could see was about from their knees down. They were wearing dirty blue jeans with frayed cuffs and worn work boots. After a few seconds of looking in the closet, they stepped away, and I heard a loud crash come from my room, followed by a scream of frustration. That scream was the most unnerving part of the incident for me. It reminded me far too much of my stepfather, who would scream in a similar way when he lost his temper. He would eventually be put in a mental hospital for several mental disorders that resulted in erratic and violent tendencies. The man in the house ran back down the stairs. I heard crashes and clatters as things were thrown around and furniture knocked over, and I stayed crouched in the attic. I'd left my cell phone when I ran for the closet, and I wasn't certain I could climb down without him hearing it. After some time, the noises stopped. I started counting slowly, and when I reached 1,000, I decided it was safe enough to climb down and call the police. The first thing I noticed when I exited the closet was the intruder had flipped my bed over, I assume in an attempt to find me. That was the loud noise that I had heard after he stepped away from the closet. I couldn't find my cell phone, so I went to the landline by the bed and called the police, and I waited in my room until I heard them call out for me downstairs. The first floor was a mess, but I had expected that. Chairs had been knocked over, the sofa had been flipped, and all the books, pictures, and knickknacks I had on the shelves were thrown across the floor. The cupboards in the kitchen had been opened, and all of the boxes and canned foods had been thrown to the ground. As far as I could tell, the only thing missing was a single knife out of the wooden block in my kitchen. The police checked the house from top to bottom. They found that the side door had been forced open by something like a crowbar. They also found a few cigarette butts along my fence line, along with some foil and an empty pen tube, which the police said people often use to smoke meth. So they think he had been watching my house for a while. I realized that he must have been out there smoking cigarettes when I got home. They collected up the evidence and told me I should probably stay with family or friends that night and get the door fixed as soon as possible. I opted to just not sleep. I moved a shelf over to block the broken door and spent the next few hours cleaning things up. I would often go to the window with a flashlight and shine it along the fence line where the police found the cigarette butts and foil, but I never saw anything. The next day I called to have the door fixed and motion lights installed in the back and sides of my house. I ran a phone cable up to the attic and added a landline. I never wanted to be stuck up there without a phone again. Nothing ever happened at the house though. I lived there for 3 more years without incident. One more precaution I took was practicing getting out of bed, going into my closet, and climbing into the attic as quickly and quietly as possible. I even kept up at it when I moved, except now I go into a crawl space at the back of the closet instead of the attic. I try not to think about what would have happened if I had been a bit slower getting to the attic, or he hadn't gone into the bathroom at the end of the first hall. I'm a 23-year-old female, and I grew up in a rural area in Ontario. It was the kind of place where you never lock the doors because you know everyone in town. The all-too-trusting small-town mentality stayed with me once I moved to a big city for university. I got an apartment in a student area with a college nearby and plenty of bars within walking distance. I lived with a guy friend, Rhodey, who was a few years older than me from the same small town. I would go to the bars with friends on the weekends and stumble home alone around 2 a.m. One night on my way home, my neighbor Kyle and I met in the hallway and both headed to our own places. He was also drunk and so good looking, and he said hello and invited me inside. I ended up staying with him the night. He was nice, it was a fun night, if not a little awkward. We didn't exchange numbers, and it didn't seem like we cared for anything to come of it, so I went home in the morning and that was that. Fast forward 2 days later. I was asleep in my bed, and my roommate was half asleep on the couch with the TV on. He heard a sound that might have been the door creaking, but he ignored it in his tired state. A few minutes later, he opened his eyes to see a naked man standing in front of him, lifeless and staring into his eyes. It was Kyle. Rhodey tried to talk to him and asked him what he was doing there, but he didn't respond. Rhodey ran to my room and said, I think Kyle is here to see you." I followed him out into the living room and saw a completely naked Kyle staring at us, with the most serious and concentrated eyes I've ever seen. I tried to talk to him and ask him to leave, but once again he didn't respond. Instead, he went into our kitchen, opened the fridge, proceeded to take our butter out, and started smearing it all over his chest and face, saying nothing, and still with a completely serious look on his face. Brody and I ran to my bedroom to talk about what to do. While we were still in my room, Kyle walked down the dark hallway that led to us and stood in the dark right before the light of my room could reach him. All you could see was his silhouette, and he started whispering, "Hey, hi," repeatedly. Rhodey and I ended up calling the police and staying in my room until they came and took him back to his house. They said he must have been on something, but probably wasn't a threat. I agreed and didn't think he was a threat, but I didn't sleep well that night, knowing he was a very thin wall away from us in his apartment. Next story. We also forgot to lock our doors on another time. I was at work and Rhodey was at home. I got a message from him that said, "Please get home, someone's here and I think you must know them because I don't." I took an early lunch and came home to see what was going on. There was a man with greasy black hair so long it nearly reached his elbows, and he was pacing back and forth in our living room. Before I even got a chance to speak to him, I realized he wasn't mentally present. He would alternate between screaming at the top of his lungs like he was being ended, and then he would cry and say things like, "I can feel the pain and suffering of everyone in the world. I can hear the voices of the poor and tormented, begging for help." I would chime in and ask politely, "Do you know where you are? What's your address? Can I help you get home?" And then he would start to scream at us because this was his house and he wasn't leaving, and he wanted us to stop judging him. After 10 minutes of his rambles and pacing, he said his address to us, which was actually the neighboring apartment where Kyle lives. I knew Kyle had a roommate that I met, John, but apparently this was their third roommate. I went to his door and knocked, and thankfully the roommate John opened the door and came to retrieve Rambling Man. Later that night, John knocked on our door, and I saw it was him holding a bottle of wine. He wanted to thank us for handling the situation well and making sure he got home. Apparently the man had recently been in a mental hospital and left on his own accord, and walked into the wrong apartment. His parents came and got him, and he's now back in the hospital, safe and sound. We have some very odd neighbors. My friend and I were sleeping in my parents' room one night, when she was over, and it was probably about 3 a.m. Suddenly we hear a sound like a fart from the corner of the room, and distinctly from this one corner. So I ask my friend if she farted, and of course she says no, as it clearly came from the corner. Thinking maybe it's my dogs, as they sometimes sleep in my parents' room, I go and check it out, but realize they're not in the room with us. Okay, so that's weird, I thought, and my friend also said she heard a distinct fart too, so we assumed that maybe we both misheard. Then all of a sudden an unknown caller starts ringing my phone, and I don't answer because at this point I'm freaked out. After I decline the call, I receive a message from an unknown caller with the same area code as the caller who just called me. The text message is all in Spanish, and me and my friend decide to paste it into Google Translate, where it proceeds to say, "Did you hear the fart?" Needless to say, we never slept in my parents' room again, and we are both convinced that we have a Spanish farting ghost in our presence. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's video. We haven't done breaking in a few months, and I'm gonna be honest, these stories were pretty creepy. I thought they were exceptionally good stories by my standards. If you thought the same, well, you can let me know in the usual way. As always, a huge thanks to my lovely patrons for their constant help and support. If you'd like to help support the channel, you know what to do. The link here to Patreon is right there, and you can check out the tiers and the potential rewards, and we can figure something out. It'd be cool. Oh, I'm really hungry. I haven't eaten in hours, actually. Hope everyone else is alright. Yeah, everything is pretty much the same. I am enjoying now giving you guys, some life updates at the end of the video, but sadly there's not really much else to share. Made a Dratini mosaic earlier, and a Snorlax one, and if you know what they are, good for you. Alright then, I'll leave you guys to it. It was Pokemon, by the way, Pokemon mosaics. You all know I'm a big Pokemon fan. Alright then guys, for now, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.